Inventions are born out of necessity. Ukraine faced a problem that seemed unsolvable.
What we need is sustained and steady growth in the production and procurement of every necessary component for unmanned aerial vehicles.
Russia was sending hundreds of cheap drones overnight, and Ukraine was forced to spend dozens of times more on missiles to shoot them down each time. Every Shahed shot down seemed like a success, but in reality, every successful defense was making Ukraine a little poorer. Russia had deliberately set up this equation to deplete expensive missiles with cheap drones. It was a classic attrition trap. Supplies were dwindling, the West's supply pace couldn't keep up, and Putin was certain the trap was working. Ukraine had two options: either beg the West for an endless supply of missiles or change the rules of the game. So Ukraine devised its own solution to break this dilemma: interceptor drones. And in March 2026, this system proved its worth. In a single month, over 33,000 Russian air targets were destroyed by interceptor drones. In February, that number was around 16,500. That's a 100% increase in a single month. This might sound exaggerated, but the details you're about to see will show why this figure is accurate and why it marks a turning point for Ukraine. To understand this system, we first need to look at how it works. The interceptor drone is a simple yet ingenious concept: intercepting an enemy drone in flight and destroying it either by colliding directly or by detonating its small explosive payload near the target. Unlike traditional air defense systems, interceptor drones are cheap, lightweight, and can be mass-produced. Ukraine's most common model, the Sting, is a 3D printed platform with an aerodynamic bullet-shaped body developed by Wild Hornets. The Sting, approved by NATO, can reach speeds exceeding 340 kilometers per hour. That's much faster than a Shahed. It can operate at an altitude of 7 kilometers and is equipped with a thermal camera and an AI-assisted guidance system. The thermal camera, developed by Kerbus and Odd Systems, clearly detects the Shahed's heat signature even in the dead of night, and the 500-gram warhead shreds the target in mid-air. Its cost ranges between $1,000 and $2,500. This cost difference changes everything, because Ukraine can counter hundreds of times more air threats with the same budget. The second important model is the P1-SUN, a fully 3D printed, modular interceptor produced by Skyfall. Its cost is only around $1,000, making it the cheapest air defense system in the war. The fiber-optic linked version completely neutralizes Russia's electronic warfare systems because it is controlled via a physical cable, so signal jamming does not work. Its lightweight design, easily transportable by frontline units, makes it an ideal field weapon. In the first months of 2026, P1-SUN interceptors alone shot down over 3,000 Shahed drones. A version launched from an AN-28 aircraft has also entered testing. Thanks to the flying mothership concept, the interceptors can now initiate operations from the air as well. And for faster targets, there's the Bullet model. With a jet-powered hybrid design capable of reaching 600 kilometers per hour, this platform can even intercept Russia's new jet-powered Shahed variants. All four of these models are domestically produced and are being mass-produced through the Brave One Defense Innovation Cluster. Here's how it works operationally. Radar or acoustic sensors detect an incoming Shahed. The operator views the target on a thermal camera screen. The interceptor drone takes off and heads toward the target. Upon approach, it either collides directly or detonates its 500-gram warhead near the target. As a result, the Shahed breaks apart in mid-air, and the debris scatters over open terrain rather than falling into civilian areas. The entire process takes just a few minutes, and the cost is 1/1,000th that of a Patriot missile. This small-scale air defense concept does not replace traditional systems. It complements them. While Patriot and NASAMS systems protect against ballistic and cruise missiles, the interceptors handle the low-cost drone threat. Each system operates in its own domain, together forming a multi-layered defense network. So how do these systems perform in the field? To find the answer, just look at the pilot with the call sign Hulk. Roman Hulk from the Bulava Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Unit shot down 2 Shaheds with a Sting interceptor from a distance of 500 kilometers on April 4th. This world record marked the first time in history that an interceptor drone operator had hit a target at such a great distance from their starting position. At the time, Hulk was in a safe position, hundreds of kilometers behind the front lines. He destroyed 2 Shaheds in mid-air without being exposed to any physical danger. The unit has been active since November and has neutralized approximately 200 targets, including 184 Shaheds, with a 95% success rate. They even managed to intercept a jet-powered Shahed variant, capable of reaching speeds of 600 kilometers per hour. This was a critical moment, demonstrating the power of the bullet interceptor. The Bulava unit emphasized that these successes are not isolated experiments, but the beginning of mass deployment. The ability of a single crew to monitor and protect an area of hundreds of kilometers, rather than the standard 20 to 30 kilometers, allows the Ukrainian military to cover vast swaths of the sky while minimizing the number of personnel on the ground. But the 500-kilometer record was soon surpassed. On April 17th, Wild Hornets raised the bar fourfold. A Sting interceptor, remotely controlled by a pilot located outside Ukraine from a distance of 2,000 kilometers, successfully carried out an operation in northern Ukraine. The pilot sits in an apartment, watches the Shahed in Ukrainian skies on his screen, and the interceptor drone shreds the target in the air thousands of kilometers away. This is made possible by the Hornet Vision Control System, a digital ecosystem providing HD-quality video transmission and low-latency control overcomes traditional signal limitations, completely disconnecting operators from the front lines. The biggest advantage of this technology is scalability. In the past, one operator was needed for every 20 to 30 kilometers of area. Now, a single crew can monitor and protect hundreds of kilometers of territory. Wider coverage with fewer operators, and none of the operators are in physical danger. And the Foxtrot crew, attached to the 38th Air Defense Regiment, demonstrated just how effective this system is in April. In a single 24-hour shift, they shot down a total of 30 Russian drones, 28 Shaheds, and 2 Gerberas, using Sting drones. 30 targets, 24 hours, a single crew. Wild Hornets announced that such numbers have now become routine. In March alone, interceptor drones and mobile fire groups together destroyed over 2,300 aerial targets. This represents a 55% increase compared to February. Even helicopters became part of this layered defense, neutralizing 379 drones on their own last month. These operations are impressive on their own, but the true strength lies in the systematic structure created by all of them working together. March 2026 marked a turning point for Ukraine's interceptor program. When Defense Minister Fedorov announced the figures on April 8th, the picture became clear. Over 33,000 enemy aerial vehicles were destroyed by interceptor drones in a single month. That's exactly double the figure from February. It's the highest monthly figure since the program began, and the vast majority of the targets shot down were kamikaze-type Shaheds. The rest were small UAVs like the Orlan, Zala, and Gerbera, designed for reconnaissance and correction missions. Behind this success lies a massive supply chain operating through multiple channels. Over the past 4 months, the Ukrainian Defense Forces, the Defense Procurement Agency, the Army of Drones program, and the DOT Chain Defense Marketplace have received twice as many interceptor drones as were delivered throughout all of 2025. This multi-channel procurement mechanism ensures an uninterrupted flow. If one channel fails, the others step in. The scale of production is incredible. Over 10,000 Sting drones are produced each month. More than 280 companies are developing over 550 active solutions under the Brave One cluster. And every month, new companies join, new models are tested, and existing models are improved. This is not just weapons production, it's an ecosystem. The Ministry of Defense clearly states its objectives: 100% detection of all enemy air targets and neutralization of at least 95% of them. March figures show how close we are to this goal, and with supply doubling in April, these numbers are expected to rise further. What can Russia do against this technological leap? Short answer: it's struggling, and every solution attempt creates a new problem. Russia is trying to accelerate jet-powered Geran/Shahed variants. Faster drones could evade interceptors. But Ukraine's bullet interceptor has already responded to this threat by reaching 600 kilometers per hour. Russia is deploying foam plastic decoys like Gerbera and Patriot in 30% of its attack waves, decoy drones designed to deplete cheap interceptors. But Ukraine's AI-powered thermal cameras can distinguish real targets from decoys. The number of interceptors wasted on decoys is steadily decreasing. Russia is trying to equip drones with air-to-air missiles and increase daytime attacks to reduce the effectiveness of thermal cameras. None of this eliminates Ukraine's fundamental advantage, the cost asymmetry. An interceptor costs $1,000 to $2,500, while every Russian solution developed to evade it is exponentially more expensive. And while Ukraine produces 10,000 interceptors a month, Russia's production pace for counter-technology cannot keep up. Because sanctions are constraining the supply chain, the shortage of skilled workers has reached 4.8 million, and Soviet-era bureaucracy is slowing down innovation. Russian Z propagandist Mikhail Rybar-Zvinchuk openly admitted the situation. Blaming neighbors is a convenient excuse, but it's not true. Russians must accept that Ukraine can now launch drones from very long distances. Even the Kremlin's own propaganda network cannot hide this technological gap. And history is repeating itself in a strange way here. Because Russia has faced this exact situation before, and lost then as well. In 1986, in Afghanistan, when the CIA supplied the Mujahideen with Stinger shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles, the Soviets were fighting by relying on air superiority. Mi-24 Hind helicopters and Su-25 attack aircraft were crushing the Afghan resistance from the air. Then the Stingers arrived. These small missiles, costing $20,000 to $30,000, began shooting down Soviet helicopters and aircraft worth millions of dollars. Approximately 270 Soviet aircraft were shot down by Stingers. Soviet pilots developed countermeasures, low-altitude flights, night operations, heat traps, but these were both too late and insufficient. Helicopter support collapsed, supply lines were left unprotected, and the fear of death from the sky among the troops led to a collapse in morale. The Stingers did not win the war on their own, but they shattered the myth of the Soviet Union's invincible air power and were one of the critical factors that accelerated Gorbachev's decision to withdraw in 1988 to 89. Now, the same scenario is repeating itself in Ukraine, but on a much larger scale. Stingers were shoulder-fired and had a range of just a few kilometers. Ukraine's interceptor drones are controlled from 2,000 kilometers away. Stingers were available in limited quantities. Ukraine produces 10,000 interceptors per month. Stingers were effective only against helicopters and low-flying aircraft. Interceptor drones can track air targets of any type and at any altitude. And the psychological impact created by the Stingers, the fear that we can no longer fly safely, is now being felt in the same way by Russian drone operators and commanders. History is repeating the same lesson. A cheap, mass-producible, and asymmetric weapon can paralyze the air power of a large army. The Soviets learned this lesson in Afghanistan. Putin's Russia is learning the same lesson in Ukraine, but this time the lesson is far more brutal. Because the impact of interceptor drones isn't limited to the air, it directly alters the balance on the front lines. In March 2026, Russian forces suffered 35,351 casualties, the highest monthly figure of the war. 96% of these casualties were caused by drone attacks. Here's how it works. Interceptors shoot down Russian reconnaissance drones, blinding the artillery. Since Russian artillery cannot identify targets, it cannot fire accurately. Since they cannot fire accurately, Ukrainian positions suffer less damage. And during the same period, Ukraine's ground robots have carried out over 9,000 logistics missions, dramatically reducing infantry casualties. When these two systems work together, Ukraine achieves a 1-to-5 casualty ratio. For every 1 Ukrainian soldier, there are 5 Russian soldiers. According to Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, Ukraine holds a 1.3-to-1 advantage in the use of attack drones. Some brigades aim to use robots at a 30% rate instead of infantry, and Zelensky has demanded the production of at least 50,000 ground robots per year. Drone fear among Russian soldiers is leading to a collapse in morale. Units deploying to the front encounter drone threats even while still at assembly points, making rotations more difficult. As Russia grapples with these challenges, the international impact of this technology is growing, and Ukraine is turning it into a strategic asset. Polish Prime Minister Tusk announced that Ukraine's drone expertise will be combined with Polish and EU funds to create an interceptor fleet. Ukraine's unique experience in combat with unmanned aerial vehicles will help protect Poland and the EU from air attacks, he said. Norway signed a joint drone production agreement in addition to $7 billion in defense aid. Thousands of medium-range drones will be produced in Norway, and deliveries will begin this summer. Norwegian Defense Minister Sandvik described this as a collaboration that benefits both countries and strengthens Norway's defense industry. Estonia has signed new agreements regarding unmanned aerial vehicle procurement and anti-drone technologies. It is allocating 0.25% of its GDP to support Ukraine. 6 defense industry agreements have been signed with Azerbaijan, and Ukrainian experts are providing on-site support for air defense against Iranian attacks. And Gulf countries such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE have begun showing serious interest in Ukrainian interceptors. Partners in the Middle East want to integrate Ukraine's battle-proven anti-drone architecture into their own defenses. This technology is of vital importance, especially for countries facing the Iranian drone threat. Zelensky announced that spending priorities within the EU's €90 billion support package will be directed toward drones. This technology, born out of the war in Ukraine, is becoming a global export product and a diplomatic asset. Drone diplomacy is now an integral part of Ukraine's foreign policy. Looking at the bigger picture, Ukraine's Interceptor drone program has fundamentally shifted the cost balance of the war. In less than a year, it evolved from a conceptual idea into an industrial system capable of destroying 33,000 targets per month. Take a look at the timeline. In the spring of 2024, the first R&D work began via the Brave 1 platform. The testing and scaling phase was completed throughout 2025. Full operational capability was achieved by early 2026, and in March 2026, 33,000 targets were destroyed in a single month. The transition from concept to industrial scale took less than 2 years. This pace is unimaginable for Russia's centralized and bureaucratic defense industry. Drones costing between $800 and $3,000 took on the burden of $4 million Patriot missiles and preserved traditional stockpiles. The remote control range, which started at 500 kilometers, has increased to 2,000 kilometers. Operations that began on land have expanded to sea and air. More interceptors have been delivered in the last 4 months than in all of 2025, and Russia's countermeasures cannot keep up with Ukraine's pace of adaptation. At the start of the war, Russia was using its cheap drones to deplete Ukraine's expensive missiles. Now, Ukraine is using its cheaper drones to destroy Russia's cheap drones. The equation has completely flipped, and this shift is irreversible. Because Ukraine is producing faster every month, developing smarter systems, and gaining more international partners. Defense Minister Fedorov's words sum up this transformation. The future of war belongs to autonomous systems. Ukraine is writing this future right now, and the world is watching. Because this technology, tested in Crimea, proven in Donetsk, and expanded in the Black Sea, is transforming not just a war, but air defense itself. Russia's biggest problem is this: it has neither the time nor the resources to resist this change. And every night, another Shahed falling from Ukraine's skies proves this reality. So what are your thoughts on this topic? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on TGN's special analyses, please subscribe to our channel and don't
Iran believed it controlled one of the most powerful choke points on Earth. For decades, it sat at the edge of the Strait of Hormuz and built an entire national strategy around a single idea: control the passage, control the world's energy, control the world's energy, and you control the decisions of nations. If the strait closes, oil stops. If oil stops, industries slow down. If industries slow down, economies weaken. If economies weaken, governments panic. And when governments panic, they negotiate. That was the logic. That was the leverage. That was the weapon Iran believed it had perfected over 40 years. And for a long time, it worked perfectly. Not because Iran used it, but because it didn't have to. The threat alone was enough. The idea of closing the Strait of Hormuz was more powerful than actually doing it. No country wanted to test that reality. No global power wanted to risk triggering a disruption that could shake the entire world economy, because nearly 20% of global oil supply moves through that narrow corridor. That is not just a statistic. That is the backbone of global energy flow. So the system stayed stable, the balance held, the threat remained theoretical until 2026. Because in 2026, everything changed. The theory was no longer enough. The situation escalated, and for the first time, the possibility of closure became real. And when that moment came, something unexpected happened. The world did not freeze, it adapted. And that single shift changed everything. When tensions escalated and the Strait of Hormuz was effectively disrupted, the immediate impact was massive. Shipping traffic slowed down dramatically. Oil tankers hesitated to enter the region. Insurance premiums skyrocketed. Many routes became too risky to operate. Oil prices surged rapidly. Markets reacted instantly. Fear spread across global financial systems. Governments rushed into emergency meetings. Energy security became the top priority overnight. And one question dominated global discussions. Can the world function without the Strait of Hormuz? At first, the answer seemed obvious. No, because infrastructure takes years to build. Because global supply chains are deeply connected. Because geography cannot be changed overnight. But that assumption did not last long. Because the system did not collapse. It adjusted. It moved. It started searching for alternatives. And one country moved faster than anyone expected. The United Arab Emirates. Instead of reacting with military escalation, the UAE took a completely different approach. It responded with infrastructure. It activated a pipeline, not a new pipeline, not something built in response to the crisis, but something that had been quietly developed years earlier. A pipeline designed specifically for this kind of scenario. This pipeline connects Abu Dhabi's inland oil fields directly to the port of Fujairah, and Fujairah is located on the Gulf of Oman, outside the Strait of Hormuz, outside the choke point. That location is critical, because it allows oil to bypass the strait completely. And the moment the crisis escalated, the UAE pushed the system to its limits. Oil that would normally flow through Hormuz was redirected. Instead of moving through the Persian Gulf, it moved eastward, straight to open waters, straight to international markets. The pipeline carries around 1.5 to 1.8 million barrels per day. That is not enough to replace Hormuz entirely, but it is enough to change the equation. Because for the first time, a major energy exporter proved something important. Hormuz is not the only route. And once that idea becomes reality, everything changes. Because power in geopolitics is not just about control, it is about perception. And the perception of absolute control had just been broken, but the UAE was not alone in this shift. Saudi Arabia moved as well. Its east-west pipeline became a critical part of the global response. This pipeline stretches across the country from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea, and during the crisis, its capacity usage increased dramatically. Millions of barrels per day were redirected. Oil that would have passed through Hormuz was sent across land instead. Together, these pipelines created something new, not a replacement system, but a backup system, a parallel route, enough to reduce panic, enough to stabilize supply, enough to show that the system can adapt under pressure, and adaptation is the most dangerous thing for any choke point strategy. Because choke points depend on dependency. They depend on the idea that there is no alternative. The moment an alternative appears, even a partial one, the entire strategy starts to weaken. And that is exactly what happened. Iran's leverage was not destroyed overnight, but it was challenged. And once leverage is challenged, it begins to erode. But this is where the situation becomes more complex. Because pipelines are not perfect solutions. They have limits. They have capacity constraints. They cannot carry the same volume as global shipping routes. And more importantly, they are fixed targets. Unlike ships that move across oceans, pipelines stay in one place. They can be located, they can be tracked, they can be targeted. That makes them vulnerable. And that vulnerability quickly became part of the equation. Energy infrastructure came under pressure. Facilities faced disruptions. Operations slowed down in key areas. And critics raised an important argument. Replacing one vulnerable system with another does not eliminate risk. It simply changes its form. And that argument is valid. Because even with pipelines operating at full capacity, the global system remained under stress. Supply stayed tight, prices remained volatile, uncertainty continued to dominate market behavior. So the Strait of Hormuz did not become irrelevant overnight. It still mattered, it still carried weight, but something deeper had changed, the perception of dependence. Before this crisis, Hormuz was seen as irreplaceable, as a single point of failure that could not be bypassed. Now it was seen differently. Now it was one route among several. Still important, but no longer absolute. And that shift in perception changes behavior. Because geopolitics is not just about physical control, it is about psychological leverage. If countries believe they have no choice, they act cautiously. They avoid confrontation. They maintain balance. But if they believe alternatives exist, even imperfect ones, everything changes. They take stronger positions. They form new alliances. They invest in new infrastructure. And that is exactly what started happening. Energy importers began diversifying their supply routes. New agreements were signed. Emergency investments were approved. Projects that had been delayed for years suddenly became urgent because the world had learned something important. Dependence is a risk, and reducing that risk became the new priority. Countries that once stayed neutral started shifting their stance. Regional dynamics began to change, and the system started evolving in real time. And that evolution is the real story here. Because even if the Strait of Hormuz fully reopens, the system will not go back to what it was before. The assumption that one narrow waterway can control global energy has been broken. And once that assumption is broken, it cannot be easily restored. The long-term impact of this shift could reshape the entire region. More pipelines will be built. More alternative routes will be developed. More redundancy will be added to the system. And that means less reliance on any single choke point. And less reliance means less leverage. Iran's strategy was built on geography, on positioning, on the belief that location alone could guarantee power. But geography can be bypassed. Infrastructure can expand. Technology can evolve. And when enough pressure is applied, the world adapts faster than expected. That is exactly what happened. The attempt to demonstrate control triggered a response that accelerated independence. The move that was supposed to strengthen leverage may have actually weakened it, and that is where the real strategic shift begins, because once the world starts building around you, your position changes. Slowly at first, then all at once. And Iran is now facing that reality. A reality where its most powerful advantage is no longer unquestioned. A reality where the world is no longer waiting. It is moving. It is building. It is adapting. And once adaptation begins, it does not stop. It accelerates. But what makes this shift even more significant is what it reveals about the limits of power built on geography. Because for decades, Iran's entire strategy depended on one assumption, that the world had no choice. That assumption is now under pressure. And once an assumption like that starts to crack, it does not stop at the surface. It spreads deeper into every layer of the system. Because this is not just about oil flows. This is about decision-making at the highest levels of global power. When the Strait of Hormuz was disrupted, countries were forced to confront a reality they had avoided for decades. What happens if the choke point fails? And more importantly, what happens if it can be bypassed? That question is now shaping long-term strategy. Energy importing nations are no longer thinking in terms of stability. They are thinking in terms of resilience, because stability can be broken. But resilience can absorb shocks. And that shift in thinking is already visible. Countries like China and India, which depend heavily on Gulf energy supplies, are accelerating diversification plans. They are expanding storage capacity. They are securing alternative suppliers. They are investing in infrastructure that reduces reliance on any single route, because the lesson is clear. Dependence creates vulnerability, and vulnerability invites disruption. At the same time, global energy companies are adjusting their strategies. Shipping routes are being reassessed, risk calculations are being updated, insurance models are being rewritten, because the cost of disruption has now been experienced in real time, and once that cost is understood, behavior changes permanently. But there is another layer to this story, a layer that goes beyond economics, a layer that involves politics and alliances, because the response to the crisis was not just technical, it was political. Countries that once maintained careful neutrality are now being pulled into clearer positions. The UAE's decision to activate its bypass pipeline was not just an economic move, it was a strategic signal. A signal that it is willing to operate independently of Iran's influence. And that signal did not go unnoticed. Regional dynamics began to shift almost immediately. Alliances started strengthening. Security cooperation increased. Joint planning discussions intensified. Because the risk was no longer theoretical. It was real. And real risks demand real responses. Saudi Arabia's actions reinforced this shift. By increasing the use of its east-west pipeline, it demonstrated that large-scale redirection is possible. Not perfect, not complete, but possible. And possibility is enough to change strategic thinking, because once something is proven possible, it becomes a foundation for future expansion, and that is exactly what is happening now. Discussions are already underway about expanding pipeline capacity. New routes are being evaluated, long-term infrastructure projects are being accelerated, because the goal is no longer just efficiency, the goal is redundancy. Multiple routes, multiple options, multiple layers of security, and every new layer reduces dependence on the Strait of Hormuz. Every new project weakens its strategic importance. But this transition is not simple. It comes with costs. Building pipelines is expensive. Maintaining them is complex. Protecting them requires constant vigilance. And even then, they remain vulnerable, because fixed infrastructure cannot move. And in a region with ongoing tensions, that matters. Attacks on energy infrastructure highlight this risk clearly. Facilities can be targeted. Supply can be disrupted. Repairs can take time. And during that time, markets react. Prices move. Confidence drops, uncertainty spreads. So while pipelines provide alternatives, they also introduce new challenges. And managing those challenges requires coordination. Coordination between governments, coordination between companies, coordination between allies, because no single actor can manage this alone. And that is leading to another important shift, increased international cooperation. Countries that once operated independently are now working together more closely. Information sharing is increasing. Joint security measures are being discussed. Collective responses are being planned because the threat is shared. And shared threats create shared interests. This is how geopolitical landscapes evolve, not through single events, but through reactions to those events. And the reaction to the Hormuz disruption is still unfolding, but its direction is already clear. Less dependence, more diversification, greater resilience. That shift is not temporary, it is structural. Because once systems start adapting, they do not return to their previous state. They evolve, they expand, they reinforce the changes that kept them alive. And that is exactly what is happening now. The Strait of Hormuz is still there. The ships will eventually return, the traffic will recover, but the illusion is gone. The belief that one narrow passage can control the entire global energy system has been broken. And in geopolitics, perception is power. When perception changes, power follows. Iran did not just test its strategy, it exposed its limits. Because a strategy built on control only works as long as that control remains unquestioned. The moment it is challenged, the system begins searching for a way out. And once that search begins, it does not stop. It accelerates. It spreads across industries, across countries, across alliances. Every new pipeline, every new agreement, every new route is part of that acceleration, is part of that shift away from dependence. And that is the real consequence of this moment. Not just disruption, but transformation. Because the world is no longer reacting. It is preparing. Preparing for a future where no single choke point can hold it hostage. Preparing for a system that is more flexible, more distributed, more resilient. And in that system, leverage changes, power shifts, and strategies that once seemed unbreakable start to fade. Iran built its advantage over decades, carefully, patiently, strategically. But in one moment, by trying to prove that advantage, it triggered the process that could eventually erase it. And that is the paradox of power. The more you try to prove it, the more you risk losing it. The Strait of Hormuz is not gone, but its dominance is no longer absolute. Its control is no longer guaranteed, and its role in global energy is no longer untouchable. The world has seen another way. And once the world sees another way, it never forgets it. This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of a new phase, a phase where control is replaced by competition, where dependence is replaced by diversification, and where every crisis becomes a catalyst for change. Because in the end, the most powerful force in geopolitics is not control, it is adaptation.